about school in digital society. And don't forget again to take part in our conference challenge, those who are here in the Grand Hotel Union Hall, or our viewers and listeners via the Conviva platform or via live stream and the social media. Our opening speaker of this session will talk about positive education and positive psychology. I'm really honored to announce Dr. Martin Seligman, the Zellerbach Family Professor of Psychology and Director of the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania, where he focuses on positive psychology. Learned helplessness, prospection, optimism, and positive education. In 2021, Mr. Seligman was named the most influential psychologist in the world by the Academic Influence. His mission is to attempt to transfer social science to work on the best things in life: strength, positive emotion, good relationship, meaning, and human flourishing. So, Dr. Seligman, are we connected? Can you hear us? Oh yes, here you are.
All right.
We can see you now, and I think that we can hear you. Can we just make a brief audio test? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes. Can you hear me well?
Oh yes, now we can hear you well, we can see you well, so we're really eager to for your presentation. And as far as we are informed, there will be also a possibility to ask questions to you in the later part of your appearance.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll think about it. Now I'm really honored to give you the floor, Dr. Seligman.
Since we're talking about school, let's start with a quiz. I'm going to give you a 2-question quiz. Take out a piece of paper and a pen, and I'll give you question 1. In 2 words or fewer, what do you most want in life? Okay, that's question 1. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer. Question 2. In 2 words or fewer, what do schools teach? Now, since I'm not here in person, I can't call on you to read out your answers, but I've done this dozens of times with hundreds of teachers and thousands of students, and I can tell you basically what you wrote. Under what you most want in life, you wrote happiness, love, fulfillment, success, harmony, meaning, purpose. Under what do schools teach, you wrote down discipline, literacy, numeracy, conformity, how to get a job. And what's remarkable about this 2 questions is there's no overlap between the 2. Schools do not teach what we most want in life. And I'm going to talk about why that's so and how we can change that and what the consequences of that are for the future of education. There is something new under the sun now. Part of the reason we didn't want to teach happiness, well-being, fulfillment, meaning, is that there was no technology documented that could actually do that. And indeed, in the world of psychology, Freud and Schopenhauer told us that the best you could ever do in life was not to be miserable. So the job of psychology, psychiatry, was to hold our suffering to as near zero as possible. Now, the theme of what I'm going to say in the next 30 minutes is that indeed we can build well-being. We can do it in school, and that the Freudian notion that a good life is just about minimal misery is empirically false, morally insidious, and a dead end for education and for a nation. So I want you to imagine something I'll call positive education. In positive education, we both continue to teach the traditional goals of education, the second list, for the most part, the skills that lead people to success in the workplace. But in addition, we can teach life satisfaction and happiness. So I'm going to contend that we now know something about raising happiness in schools for children and adolescents. Now, indeed, if I had said this 30 years ago to you, you really should not have listened. And that is that because of the dogmas of psychology, all of our measures, everything we knew was about the negative side of life. There was no theory of well-being and happiness. All of our measures were about misery, depression, anxiety. We didn't have measures of well-being. All of our interventions were about both pharmacological and, most importantly, educational and psychological, were about relieving misery. And now things have changed, and that's what I've been up to for the last 30 years or so. So first, let me tell you what my theory of well-being is, and this will be relevant to us as teachers. I am, by the way, a teacher. That's my primary duty. But this theory is about what we can raise in our young people, in addition to knowledge, literacy, numeracy, and the like. The theory says there are 5 different elements that free people, children, adolescents, who are not suffering pursue. And the acronym in English is PERMA, P-E-R-M-A. The first one is positive emotion, feeling good, subjective well-being, being happy. But there's more, this is more than just cheerfulness and smiling, because the second element of positive education and positive psychology is engagement, being when time stops for you, being one with the music. The third element that's teachable is relationships, better relationships. The fourth element, and very important for school and the workplace, is meaning, purpose, and mattering. And the fifth element is the traditional element of school, accomplishment. So that's my working theory of what it is we can be raising in school, in addition to raising knowledge. Now, the second thing that's new in positive psychology and positive education are we have interventions that work. We have interventions that reliably raise well-being. And I'll show you some data in a couple of minutes on this. It's well tested, but I come from the kind of psychology in which we're very careful about measuring outcomes against random assignment, placebo-controlled situations. And I spent a good part of my life measuring psychotherapy and medications against placebo controls. So when positive psychology and positive education began, we started to look at interventions against random assignment, placebo-controlled, that were designed to raise well-being. And I'll tell you a couple of interventions in a minute, but the reason these interventions are important is we now know a great deal about the consequences of happiness. Now, you're all familiar with the causes of happiness, so you probably think being healthy, having good relationships, being successful produces high well-being. But what we've worked on for the last 25 years is the opposite. what are the consequences of having high well-being? The reason this is important is I'm going to suggest to you we should be teaching well-being. And that's because it turns out high well-being is causal. So there are now hundreds of studies in what you do with children, with adults at time one is to do something like measure their talents, their IQ, their grades at time one, and you also measure their well-being at time one. And then you look into the future and you ask the question, what are the consequences of having well-being over and above the initial talents, the initial grades? And the answer is that well-being has very large effects. It's not just caused by success, it causes success. So in the area of accomplishment in school, children who have high well-being learn more. They get higher national standardized examinations. They do better on grade point average than their talents predict. Secondly, we look at athletes, and we find in the major baseball leagues, the National Basketball Association, that athletes who have high well-being go on to do better, particularly when things are difficult. And we also find physical health is better, and very important for you as teachers, optimistic and people with high well-being live on average 6 to 8 years longer than pessimistic people with low well-being, and that's holding constant all the usual risk factors. So that's a very brief argument that the consequences of teaching well-being, if we could do it, are better accomplishment in school, better performance in the workplace, better performance on the playing field, and better health and longevity. Now, let me talk about interventions, what can be done in the classroom, what you can teach your students about well-being. And I'm going to try to share my screen now to do this. I'm going to talk about positive education and their data on the efficacy of the interventions. So the first thing I want you to look at is this picture, the swan. And the reason I'm going to do that, I just have time to talk about one intervention that can be taught in the classroom that's very well validated. I'll have to use a homey example from my own life about this. So my wife is an amateur black and white photographer. And about 3 years ago, she came downstairs and said, Marty, I just got a call from the editor of Black and White magazine, and I won. I beat all these professional photographers for the best black and white photograph. Now, the question is, when your spouse or a child or your best friend comes to you with a victory, what do you say? And by the way, I should tell you that this intervention comes out of marital therapy. I taught marital therapy for a while. There you teach people how to fight better. You're trying to change insufferable marriages into barely tolerable marriages. And instead of doing that, positive marital therapist asks, how do you celebrate together? What do you say when someone you love comes to you with a victory? Well, there's a 2x2 table of what you can say. So Mandy came to me with this astonishing news, and what I would have said, and what you, for the most part, would say, until I read the literature, was passive constructive, which is, congratulations, dear, you deserve it. that has no effect on a relationship. I've trained 40,000 drill sergeants in the United States Army on this technique, and what they do for the most part is passive destructive. So they would have said something like, you know what tax bracket that's going to put us into? And that's a relationship destroyer. Sorry, that's active destructive. Passive destructive is what's for dinner. The only thing that works is active constructive, and you can teach this. In active constructive, you begin with an authentic appreciation of what's said. In that case, I said, Mandy, was it the swan, the black and white swan that won the prize? And she said, yeah. And now you try to put the person in touch with the strengths that brought about this victory. So I said to Mandy to relive it, you know, where were you when the editor called? And she told me. Said, now, what did he say exactly verbatim? And she told me. And what strengths do you think you have in your photography that won you this prize? And she said, well, I'm good with gray, I'm good with nuances. And I said, well, how can you teach our kids? I have 7 children, by the way, two grandsons just born in the last 2 weeks, our first grandsons. And how can you teach the kids about photography and art using that strength? And finally, let's go open that bottle of champagne in the refrigerator. Now, there are about a dozen techniques or so that you can teach. And I'm an empirical scientist, and I wouldn't be presenting the notion that in the classroom we can teach higher well-being, but for the large amount of data that these things work. So there are 340, this is a meta-analysis of 347 studies with 72,000 people, varying in age. And what they show is that these interventions increase well-being, they increase strengths, they increase quality of life, they decrease depression, they decrease anxiety, they decrease stress. Then these are the data set about programs as a whole. That was the data set about each of the individual interventions to raise well-being. And there are 33 controlled trials with about 24,000 participants. And these are aimed at producing resilience, mostly in the classroom, using cognitive behavioral interventions of the sort that I just mentioned preventatively. And what you show is significant effect sizes for children, for adolescents, with or without homework, and very importantly, led by teachers. So there's good teacher training for this, and these effects exist 6 months later. And finally, in the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, there are 49 studies with about 6,000 children and adolescents. And again, you find these programs are relative to controls, decreased depression, they decreased conduct disorders, they decrease anxiety, they decrease distress, and they raise well-being. I don't have time to talk about how you can find out in detail about all of this, but here's the email and the website of the International Positive Education Network. So for those of you who want this in detail, that's the relevant material. Okay. So I want to conclude with a few remarks about COVID and what we've learned about young people in COVID over the last year and a half. So we've been asking the question, who has been most damaged by COVID? And very interestingly, when we first started to look at this, we found increases in mental illness, increases in anxiety and depressive disorders. But as time went on, those increases became small, and the effect was bigger on something else. Well, first we found that it's young people who are in the age of expanding, finding work, finding what they're good at, find the beginning of romantic relationships that were most vulnerable to COVID. And what we found, and here's the better way of thinking about what COVID has cost. For me, at the bottom is mental illness itself, and at the top is high PERMA, high well-being. But in the middle is languishing, and languishing is defined by not having mental illness, but having low PERMA. And so what we found during COVID is that the big effect is that quite a few young people have moved from high well-being, high PERMA, down to languishing. And that points directly to what we need to do as educators, as parents, and that is raise the PERMA to bring our young people out of languishing. So let me conclude what I've said today. I've said there is something new under the sun. 30 years ago, there was no technology about teaching well-being. All we knew about was the relief of misery. But what's happened in the last 30 years due to positive psychology and positive education is we can measure well-being, we have a theory of well-being, we have reliable interventions that can be done by parents and teachers, and particularly teachers in the classroom, that raise well-being, that bring children higher PERMA. And if you take those things together, that means that well-being can be taught in school. Secondly, well-being should be taught in school. And there are two reasons it should be taught. One, if all you cared about was achievement in school, there's very good data that high well-being increases achievement in school. But very importantly for me, our children being happy, well-being, more positive emotion, more engagement, better relationships, more meaning in life is valuable in its own right, even if it had no effect on achievement. But it does affect achievement. And so for me, much of the future of education, of parenting, of the workplace, is measuring and raising PERMA in the classroom. And the final thing I want to say is this is a meeting about digitalization and artificial intelligence. And I'm often asked, is this going to make kids smarter? Is it going to increase their knowledge? And the answer is, I really don't know. It really has not been tested. And the data that's around is quite conflicting about it. One thing I've learned about digitalization, it gives my students an opportunity to do something else while I'm teaching, and that is to look at their email. So I don't know about the future of digitalization, but you can make your students happier. You can make your students happier, and that will increase the traditional goals of education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seligman. I hope you hear the applause. So we're now open for, let's say, 2 or 3 questions from our audience, which is quite, I would say, un-Slovenian. Slovenians really like to ask questions during coffee breaks and lunch breaks. But let us try if you really encouraged a lot of people here to ask questions. So do I see a raising hand for a question? Yes, I do. And you get your microphone from the back. So, our first question, Dr. Seligman.
Okay, I will try to formulate it correctly. So in raising well-being children, how does this cope with the society that is not, that is competitive, egoistic, and if we raised children that have well-being, does that also transform society?
A very important question indeed. And as a psychologist, most of my goals are about changing not just children, but changing society as a whole. And when we live in a society that's pessimistic, that believes that there's been no human progress and that we can't overcome the challenges we have about the environment, about race and the like, this is communicated to our children. But empirically, this kind of pessimism is self-fulfilling. So when people deny human progress and communicate that to our children and tell us that everything is a mess, that's self-fulfilling. I spent a lot of my life working on helplessness and pessimists. And indeed, when a society believes those things, it is self-fulfilling. So part of our goal is not just raising the optimism and well-being of young people, but of changing the nature of society itself. Now, you mentioned competition. I'm not at all against competition. I like the traditional goals of education, and competition is one of our tools. But one can both have competition and have high PERMA as well. So in competition in teams, what you find is high PERMA within teams and competition as well. But you're probably also pointing to social comparison, in which you're competing singly against others and you're comparing yourselves to others. Well, social comparison forms of competition indeed hurt well-being. But just to sum up, even in the face of the bad events that we hear about every day, well-being is learnable. Optimism is learnable, and when it's realistic, it produces higher achievement in addition to more well-being.
Okay, thank you very much for the first answer. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes?
I understand you said that it's crucial to teach our children how to be happy. So in a way, the most important factors, of course, are teachers. Should we teach our teachers to be happy and how to empower them in order to achieve this goal you've set?
And the answer is absolutely yes. So the method of raising well-being of children is a teach the teachers method. So let me just tell you what we did with the United States Army in the teaching of positive psychology, resilience, and well-being. We trained the teachers in the Army, 40,000 of them, the drill sergeants, in the techniques of raising well-being. And the teachers themselves, in this case, the drill sergeants, then taught the 1.1 million soldiers the skills of well-being. When we go into schools, we don't teach teachers directly using manuals. We don't teach the students well-being directly. We teach the teachers first to learn well-being in their own lives, to learn techniques such as the one I talked about with the swan, and then how to teach them to children. So the methodology here is the teaching of teachers about the techniques of well-being, and then the teachers go on to teach the students, and I showed you the documentation that it works, that it raises well-being, it decreases depression, and increases achievement.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Seligman. One more question, because all good things are three. Yes, we see a lady there. Yes. That would be our last question for you, Dr. Seligman.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have been wondering, since I think that the gap between of the values of formal education and digital entertainment, for instance, this topic related to Squid Game for being the most popular Netflix series ever. And I think that there's a huge gap between our values and values representing this entertainment world being really violent. What should be done for that? Or should we somehow respond as educators to this phenomenon?
Yes, very important. In addition to the gaming programmers, there's a whole organization called Games for Health. And these are gamers who produce games and entertainment that are around the building of well-being. So it's my hope we can use the technology, and there are instances of it. There's an organization called Happify, which uses the technology to increase PERMA. So there are indeed games for health that can be used to raise PERMA. So one of my hopes about digitalization, it will become not just a tool for violence and mindless entertainment, but a tool for raising engagement, meaning, purpose in life.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Seligman. Your presentation was so great that you were actually able to provoke really interesting questions also from the audience, which is really great. We thank you all here and wish you all the best to Pennsylvania. Thank you very much again and take care. Goodbye. That was another big applause, almost a standing ovation for Dr. Seligman. Now, before we go on with our next panel, we have a short film to show. It is, of course, on the conference challenge. You're all invited to take part.
If you like challenges, exploring, collaborating while also learning a lot, then our ResetEDU challenge will be a real treat for you. The path will not be easy, but the joy and satisfaction of success will be immeasurable. You will be divided in random groups. They will not compete against each other, but compete against a challenge that is impossible to solve without cooperation. It is not about who is better or faster. We are only interested in succeeding together. And we will. You can join in person and remotely to solve challenging puzzles, explore the environment, look for hidden information, and above all, connect and learn from each other. The solution will be revealed at a gala dinner at the end of the first day. The award is priceless, but for now, a secret. Join us. Be a part of the solution.
So your conference challenge, you still have time until tomorrow, until the lunch break to take part and solve the questions. As we saw, the prize will be priceless. I'm really honored now to announce the moderator of the next panel in our conference. This is my colleague from RTV Slovenia, Ms. Ksenia Horvat, an experienced television journalist with a successful history of working in the broadcast media industry. That's the official text. Not only history, but also future, I might add. Skilled in international relations, broadcasting, television, broadcast journalism, and editing. Ksenia is a strong media and communication professional with a Master of Arts focused in comparative literature and sociology from University of Ljubljana. So the best person to do the panel, the floor is yours, Xenia. You get a microphone. It will be disinfected by myself, the big generator. It has something to do with the challenge, of course. So, have a good discussion.
Thank you very much for this optimistic announcement. And of course, also from my side, welcome to the panel, Challenge Accepted, the new roles of school in the digital era. We will discuss the changing roles of the school as space of socialization, digital security and practices, media literacy and digital citizenship. I warmly welcome all the panelists who could join us here in Ljubljana, and I also equally warmly welcome everyone who could not be with us today, but we are lucky to have them here, at least remotely. So our panelists for today's panel are, and I kindly ask them to join me on the stage, Christian Musek-Lešnik, from the Council of Experts of the Republic of Slovenia for General Education and the chair of the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Primorska. Please, wherever you. Okay. Dan Podjed from the Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts. His research focuses on the relationship between people and technologies. Thank you. We should have connection with Mrs. Rina Vurikari from the Joint Research Center. Hi, Rina.
Hello, everybody. Hey, good to be here. Thank you.
So, Joint Research Center being the EU Science Hub, and Rina's work focuses on the update of the digital competence framework for citizens. And we should have Margaret Sutherland, Professor of High Ability Studies and Inclusive Practice at Glasgow University. So, hi, Margaret, warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to see everybody.
I would also like to ask to join us on the stage Mrs. Juliane von Repert-Bismarck, founder and director of the media literacy organization Lie Detectors. Please. Great, so you could join us here in Ljubljana as well. Thank you. And we should have in Strasbourg, I believe, Ahmed Murat Kilic, Program Manager at the Education Policy Division of the Council of Europe. And Mr. Kilic specializes on the digital citizenship education. Hello, Ahmed. Great, welcome all again. All panelists have slightly different background, of course, but what you all have in common is expertise in the area of education and learning. So let's hear your main focus points related to the school and society in the digital world. I kindly ask you not to exceed too much the 3 minutes limit that this is what I already asked you in the emails. And I will start with Mr. Christian Musek-Lešnik, please.
Yeah, okay. Is it? Okay, so yeah, so based on what I've listened to till now, today, in sessions and in keynotes, I think we have some really important challenges ahead in education. So the first one I see is moving the students from being passive recipients of information to actually becoming active co-creators of knowledge themselves. The second challenge that I see is actually moving teachers from being people who actually transfer information to students to actually become or be passionate, motivating agents of the learning process. And this, of course, means that I think the first challenge would be, actually, I only bought a T-shirt with a label "one size fits all" once in a lifetime, and it was a T-shirt that actually nobody in my household could actually fit in well. So I think we should. The challenge is moving from one size fits all education towards personalizations and. Of course, digital tools are something that can be used here. And if I just can reflect on what Marty just said, I think it's really important that the main challenge might be to rethink education. We were so amazed from the times of enlightenment with the mind and reason and the brains that we kind of forgot that we are, of course, creatures of reason, but we are also creatures of emotions, relationships, and so on. And just this morning, we heard kids talking about hugs. Hug is an emotional experience, it's a social experience, it's a spiritual experience, and it's bodily experience as well. So I think we really should move towards what Marty was talking, building well-being in schools as well as building top-notch knowledge.
Thank you. Just very brief question with a short answer, please. So how does one start doing that? Does it come on the initiative of parents or professors or interested audience? How to move this process going?
I think this is a process that actually must be done if we want to remain the schools in this important position of really key social institution. So I think it takes all the stakeholders.
All the stakeholders. Okay, Mr. Dan Poudiet, please. Next 3 minutes are yours.
For me, the biggest challenge is how to bring people back in touch, which is similar to what you said before. So I think we have become somehow atomized and individualized during the last year and a half. And somehow this ominous prediction of Margaret Thatcher from 1987 that there is no society, there are just individuals, men, women, perhaps families, but no society has somehow become true. And we have to rebuild the society. We have reset the society, this is the title of the conference, and now we have to rebuild it. And schools are instrumental here in rebuilding the society. It has proven now in this year and a half how important the school is, not only to transfer knowledge. I mean, children, students can learn from screens, from books, from audio books and so on, of course. But what you cannot give them is the ability to build a society through screens. This is something that is inhumane. This is something that is not close to Homo sapiens. Our species has been used to being in touch with other people for the past 300,000 years. And we have never been, I think, so isolated in all this time. We have started to avoid each other. For example, when we greeted today, we didn't know whether to shake hands or to bow or to bump with fists or we touched with our elbows. So we have started to make new techniques of the body. And somehow, perhaps this time has been very romantic in a way, because we have started to stay away from each other and missed the touch, like Romeo and Juliet, for example. They even told us, our government told us to put our hormones on hold because there will be time in the future when we will be able to touch again. And this was one positive aspect of the whole situation. Perhaps we have started to respect more the touch. to evaluate it better, because in the old 2019 there was this time, you probably remember it, when you came to a party and you had to hug everyone, kiss everyone. We don't do it anymore because there are no parties, obviously, and we try to avoid each other. And perhaps this is one benefit, but still, we have to come together, and we start coming together in schools. This is the place where we get our friends for life, we get our partners sometimes for life, or at least we fall in love and we fall out of love. And we have to keep doing this as a society, and this is why we need schools, and this is why we need them physically, not only online.
With or without COVID, actually, isn't it? I mean,
Even
in the time before COVID, everything you mentioned was so relevant for the good.
In all times, but the problem is that I believe, and this is a bit worrying, that we have started to live in the time of permanent crisis. The crisis is ideal for the digital feudalism which is now being established. And this is the new period in time when we will spend 13 hours per day in front of screens, as we did in the last year during lockdowns, 13 hours per day, and not children, adults. Mm-hmm. So we have now here, we are on the crossroads of two human species, whether we will become human of the COVID age, Homo covidensis, or the thinking human, Homo sapiens, and decision is ours. I hope so.
Thank you so much. Okay, Mrs. Rina Vaurikari is with us now, and your 3 minutes are beginning now.
Thank you very much, everybody. I would say that world has changed a lot. Of course, you asked whether society has changed. I'm not sure exactly how, but I would also like to point out that the internet itself has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years. I'm noticing this very concretely today because, as was mentioned earlier, we're doing the update of European Digital Competence Framework for all citizens, where we define the skills that citizens should have to use internet. And the scenario nowadays today is very different from 2013 when this was first published. And these things are not only because of the pandemic, these are also because of the underlying model of the internet and monetizing it. And here we have what we have seen and keep seeing today are these excessive personal data gathering data about all your actions online. Previous speaker said we spent 13 hours online. Imagine just the number of data points that can be collected. Those can be personal data, they can be behavioral data about you, they can be also contextual data, location data from your phone, whether you're moving around or not. So all this data being used for personalization of services, of content on the internet through algorithms. We talk nowadays a lot about AI doing predictions based on your previous behavior, offering you suggestions. And this has also created sort of echo chambers on the internet, these filter bubbles that keep recommending to use similar material. And this is a very scary part of the internet that I personally would like to see changing in the future. So that's why I really admired the take of previous speakers also, that we are here to construct society, as is saying the title of the conference, to resetting education. Schools also as a places, of course, keep changing all the time. And our focus with the work that we are doing with the European Commission is moving a little bit from an individual teacher to school as an organization. They are places where people interact, teachers together with teachers, with students, students together, and so on. And here, of course, the digitalization plays a huge role, but also how we can actually enable and make sure that the digitalization works the way that we wish it to work. And there are great ways. We have Selfie for Teachers, which allows schools and teachers to take this sort of a picture of their own digital competence. This is for teachers, and then the school can also do it together. They can do it, students, school head, and teachers all do their own profile, which is brought together to see where are the competencies, key knowledge of the school as an organization, and where are the gaps, where should we work better. After COVID, we know that digital platforms, communication with parents and home, those were the points lacking behind. So that's really where we would like to see more work being done, more resetting being done, and more refocusing on. And this also includes the social and personal learning aspects and the well-being of students being here at the center. So thank you. I'll stop my first intervention here.
Thank you so much for your introductory points. And we move to Mrs. Margaret Sutherland in Glasgow. Hi, how are you? And please.
Hi, I'm well, thank you. I hope everyone is too. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So the eyes of the world have been in Glasgow, or still are in Glasgow, because of course we're currently hosting COP26. And one of the highlights of that conference for me has been hearing the voices of young people. They understand the urgency of addressing climate change. In the words of one primary-aged child who was at the Friday for Futures March, "Don't cop out, or we will cop it." They know they're going to be the ones living the longest with the consequences of inaction. Some of the most inspiring speeches that I've heard during COP26 have been made by young people. We need to listen to our young people, all of our young people, and not just those in the global north. The pandemic shone a bright and searching light on our world, and where there had previously been cracks, personally, maybe health, mental health, relationships, finances, or indeed structurally, economies, employment, systems, trade, to name but a few, that pandemic spotlight now reveals great fissures that are too great for us to ignore. And this is true in education. Whether we're thinking about the pandemic or about climate change, it's the poor and the marginalized who bear the brunt of these difficult situations. And I would argue that unless we put inclusive principles, inclusive pedagogy, and inclusive practice at the heart of what we do, be that face-to-face or digital, then we're unlikely to change the inequalities and inequities we see across our planet. When talking about inclusive education, UNESCO said, while the nature of these challenges varies depending on country or location, a shared concern is for learners who are vulnerable to marginalisation or exclusion, such as those from low-income households, refugees, living in conflict situations, as well as those of ethnic and linguistic minorities and Indigenous backgrounds and children with disabilities. Every single one of those categories mentioned refers to children and young people sitting in schools in my country. How about yours? In June 2021, UNESCO posed 3 questions as it considered inclusive teaching and learning for educational recovery. What teaching practices can ensure that all children and young people are included in schools as they reopen? How can teachers be supported and empowered to develop these practices? And what are the challenges faced by teachers and school leaders, and how can they be overcome? Listening to the voices of teachers and young people to develop ways of working that include rather than exclude is crucial as we move forward. A recent UNESCO report states teachers need to be more recognised and more highly valued. They are essential participants in defining the futures of education. And to conclude, a highly able 9-year-old said to me just last week, "Oh, I just wanted back to school. I just wanted to see my friends. I missed them." We will only reset education and training in the digital age if we put humanity and compassion at the heart of any reset. Education is not a competition. What are these international league tables about? And education should not be for profit. It really is for us all. Voilà.
Thank you so much. And Mrs. Juliane von Reppert-Bismarck is with us on the stage, please.
Working? Yes, excellent. So first of all, thank you so much for the very kind invitation to Ljubljana. It's actually my first in-person conference since March 2020. It feels quite odd. But to answer your question, so I started in 2016 an organization called Lie Detectors, and what we do is something very practical. Our concern is disinformation and the damage that it does to our well-being, seeing as we've been talking about well-being, but also about democracy. And we do our work by empowering young people and their teachers to sort fakes from facts online, to understand the grey shades that lie in between, but also to understand how professional journalism works. We are journalist-led and we're philanthropically funded. And we advocate a lot for smart policies and policy change. And I want to give you an example of why this is something that we focus on so carefully and so practically and so urgently. It is when we walk into classrooms, either in person or since the pandemic, via video conferencing, and in recent weeks, wherever we can, in person again, while we still can, the children walk up to the journalists and they ask questions like these. They say, "Is it true that wearing a mask is bad for my health? What shall I do if my aunt sends me a chain message telling me to forward it because Bill Gates is going to implant a microchip in my arm when I get vaccinated?" They also ask questions like, "I understand that there are fact checkers, but why should I believe the fact checkers? Aren't they just getting money for what they do? And who are they getting the money from anyway?" So all of this is a really, really good example of what can happen in this pandemic in particular when disinformation is allowed to circulate unchecked and go viral. It undermines our trust in facts, it undermines our trust in science, and ultimately it undermines our ability to make informed decisions. And with that, it undermines the fundament of democracy, because that is what we so pressure and crave and prize, our ability to make informed decisions and decide what our world should look like. So what we do about this very practically is we currently work with more than 250 journalists in 5 countries and 3 languages. We train them with a very particular script. We send them into classrooms to deliver impulse sessions of 90 minutes to children aged 10 to 15 and to their teachers. We increasingly work with teachers, and we work very much with their feedback, because we want to know how well we're doing and whether this is something that really translates across language divides and different cultural landscapes and media landscapes as well. And we have found 3 things. First of all, there is a growing and very important generational gap in the way that we are consuming information. The place where we adults get our information from is not the place where the children tell us they get their information from at all. And this kind of renders the whole idea of the vertical transfer of information from one generation to another obsolete. The good news is that you can give children and even teachers very simple tools, and they really crave them. Nobody really likes to be told that they got it wrong and that they believed a lie. It's very hard to unlodge a lie once it's taken hold, but nobody wants to be, led up the garden path either. And so they take these tools, they can work with them, and they tell us how much they need this. The demand for what we do is intensifying. We're actually going to be going into Central and Eastern Europe next year. And for this kind of work to take root, and for this kind of, the benefit of this work to have systematic and long-term effect, there really are a few things that can be done. First of all, we can all, those of us who are policymakers, can support the OECD in adding this critical digital literacy to the PISA rankings gauges. Whoever has the money can give money to train teachers, and we can, above all, make sure that this keeps clear of any political or commercial interest buying, which we in Brussels see an awful lot of. And once you do that, we can actually get quite a lot done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Ahmed Murat Kilic joins us from Council of Europe. Please. We have slight technical problems, but maybe they are just very simple. I'm sure this could be sorted in a second. Okay. Could you just speak? Could you speak on, Ahmed, just a little bit so we see whether we can hear you? Okay, we have slight problem, and we will come back to you, Ahmed. We will give you time for your 3-minute speech, but in the meantime, I'm getting more nervous because we have about 45 minutes for our conversation now. So let's keep going, and I'll come back to you. We've heard so many interesting subjects from Professor Seligman and from all 6 of you. So I have a couple of individual questions, and then later on I would like to have a debate structured on where we are now and what we would all like for the future. So, Mr. Musekleshnik, I ask you for a short answer. You've pointed out that the pace of adaptation of the schooling system is lagging behind the changes in society. So could you just briefly tell us, which main areas are there that you want us to be aware of?
Oh, actually, everything. I don't want to sound gloomy, but I think educational system must change in order to survive. Otherwise, something else will come instead of them, and it won't be as beneficial to society as the system of general education for everybody is. So I really think that it's important that school system change and try to change with the same pace as the societies do. We are lagging behind, and of course it's really important not to hurry with changes in educational system, because it's quite easy to change it for the worse, and it's hard to make changes for the better. But I think that the crisis in education that actually this COVID crisis showed us is actually a result of educational systems being unprepared and lagging behind with the needed changes. And I kind of reflected previously what changes I think we really need. But the thing is, I think we really have to rethink the school. 100 years ago, the school was a gateway for children to information. And now kids have information in their pockets. They need different approaches, different tools, different approaches.
Are you speaking mostly about Slovenian educational system or general European educational system?
I think it's quite a general thing, and it's something that actually policymakers in each country are now bothering with and thinking very hard what to do and how to react to all the challenges ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Podjet, you mentioned homo confidences that is on the rise. But you have also said that we lack this human touch. You've mentioned that students try to avoid Zoom meetings and they want to meet in person. So maybe we have somewhere in our brains ingrained something that want us to remain Homo sapiens sapiens.
Of course we...
Once again. Yeah. Maybe you should just leave it on. Okay. Let me help you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Technical problems. And I wanted to mention first what happened to speaker from Council of Europe. This is an example of what was going on in schools last year. So some students were unable to connect while others were able to speak very clearly because they were technically equipped enough and had support of their parents or somebody else. And what I'm really worried about that we are not only on the crossroad between the two species, Homo covidensis and Homo sapiens, there is also the third on the rise, the one that is super technically equipped, Homo Deus, as it is called by Harari. So there will be in the future, but I'm speaking about the near future, 10, 20 years, some people who will be able to upgrade their mental capabilities by Neuralink, for example, which is now being invented by Elon Musk and similar, well, not inventors, but investors, actually. And we have to be really careful here not to support this digital divide even more. The school is very primitive in a sense, the school as we knew it 10, 20 years ago, but it is also the great equalizer. And what we did in the last year is the great divider. Those who had better equipment at home and financially well done parents, those students were able to get more knowledge, while others, the majority, somewhere were unable to get the knowledge. And University of Cambridge did a study in the Netherlands about the progress of children during lockdowns, and what they found out is that on average they got nowhere. So, but it's not true that nobody got nowhere. Those children with richer parents, who were technologically more equipped at home, progressed, and those who didn't have this possibility lagged behind. And this is something we should prevent in the future, or at least keep in mind when we speak about the so-called digital transformation. I'm really worried about this word digital transformation, because it promises us some kind of utopia in the future, as if we will be all transformed into some kind of superhumans. Well, most of us will remain Homo covidensis in front of screens, being the workforce or even servants of the very few people who will be Homo Deus.
Digital feudalists.
Digital feudalists, yeah. I mean, this is something we should keep in mind when we build schools for the future, because this is the fundament of society, and we should here really keep equal opportunities for everyone if we want to have digital democracy in the future.
Okay, this is also really good starting point for Ahmed at Council of Europe, who specializes also in the digital citizenship. So maybe Ahmed, if you can hear me, I'll try to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Excellent. You have your 3 minutes, and you've heard our discussion so far, so maybe you can already sort of, get into with some of your observations into what was said so far here on the stage, please.
Okay, I'll keep it very brief. I'm a parent of two. The older one is just in the university this year. I was talking to my son last night, and I asked him, why he wanted to go back to the school. And he said, he wanted to socialize, interact with peers and teachers, and get motivated. Although my son is a really passionate and motivated student, he said that, and he said it's important to develop a sense of belonging to some club, to some building. I don't know. So whatever the futures say, I believe that the school will exist, and then it's a matter of how we position the school, the new school, which is the question of this challenge, actually, this panel. And in my opinion, the school as a learning environment is just a part of the bigger learning environment when in the context of blended learning. And there are many models like flipped classroom, which works really well, but we adapted quickly or tried to adapt quickly to the pandemic conditions. But now we don't adopt a blended learning. It's too soon we forget the challenge we had. So we need to think of how we can better use the premises of schools to involve more students at the same time by giving some chance to online education and dividing the time between online and offline, or in the school premises to allow more students to come who doesn't have access to digital tools to benefit from the school conditions. The second one is that, which is my actually area of specialization, school is a gateway to the digital world. So, I mean, it's preparing students for the digital era, digital life. It should actually prepare them for life, for all the domains of life, not just for the labor force, but life as a whole. And in this sense, if we teach students at school about digital, but not allow digital technology or digital itself in the school premises. So it's very controversial. We teach about something, but we don't allow them to use it properly to learn the details. And that's a problem. So they knew, but then they carry on the activities, online activities at home, not in school. And at home, it is not supervised, or really limited supervision is there by parents who doesn't have the proper knowledge of how they manage the learning of their kids. So we should allow schools to even, to provide a discussion environment, to provide students with an environment they can discuss everything, even the most controversial issues, and to learn how to deal with them, and with technology in a positive and responsible manner. So when they find themselves in the digital environment with many challenges, they are prepared to tackle them. And in this, to respond to this, we have digital citizenship education by the Council of Europe. It's a concept developed in 2016. It's basically active participation, responsible participation in the digital environment, and engagement with digital technologies. And it's not just about having technical and digital skills, but also the other necessary competencies, like competencies for democratic culture, to give meaning what you are doing with those skills, and to have a purpose. So you can become a really good coder, but either you hack the banks or you use it for the benefit of the society. I think that's the thin line that we are trying to intervene and give purpose of this digital skills and technical skills. And last but not least, everyone, including us, talk about empowering learners, but we should also talk about empowering schools and giving them the chance to provide as many opportunities as possible to not compete, but to cope with the changes and challenges brought by different topics, including the pandemic, including environment, etc.
Thank you so much, and I'll move to Glasgow for a second, because we've just heard about teaching democracy. Margaret, you were speaking about all these young people that are on the streets of Glasgow. Could you identify yourself? I mean, how well do all these young people know the mechanisms of maybe democratic pressure on their government, on public opinion, to enforce all the preventing measures before the climate change?
Well, I certainly think there is an increasing awareness, and I can't speak, of course, for everywhere, but certainly in Scotland, which is one of the 4 nations that make up the United Kingdom, in 2014 there was a great amount of engagement around the principles of democracy, why democracy was important. There were groups going into schools to help young people to understand why participating in democratic processes is important for them as individuals, but more than that, about it being important collectively for the common good, if you like. And of course, that was around about the time that we were leading up to the referendum on Scottish independence. So there was certainly heightened, I think, awareness of that. I think some of that, of course, is driven by curriculum. We have a curriculum called Curriculum for Excellence. It's not a national curriculum, it's national guidelines, but I would argue that all schools are using it in Scotland. And very much we're looking at issues of sustainability, we're looking at becoming democratic schools. We're looking at processes within schools and involving young people in the decisions that are made within schools, so that in a sense they're experiencing what it's like to be part of a democratic community, with obviously the idea that that will go on to inform them as they go on to live their lives as they leave school.
Thank you. Juliane, you've mentioned earlier when you walk into average class and children ask you all those questions about vaccines, about disinformation that they hear from their parents. Tell us a little bit about how well are children equipped themselves to distinguish between something which is maybe misinformation and something which could be called the truth. We adults have problems with that, great problems. So what about children?
That's a really great question, and I could talk about it for several hours, but I won't.
Okay, you have about a minute and a half.
So children have a really natural affinity for the internet. That's not surprising, right? And when we ask them, we go into classrooms, we ask them what platforms are you on, they generally name about 5 to 6 different platforms that they're on when they are 11 years old, when they're 13 years old, when they're 14 years old. The number actually goes up, the number of platforms that they're on. And I don't know how many of you do this, but I have got into the habit of really looking over the shoulder of children on public transport and just seeing the speed at which they do this. It's really quite extraordinary. It's something that I would never be able to compete with. But the thing that they don't have is this idea of what separates a bona fide journalistic content or input that has been fact-checked, that has been done according to professional standards, which of course journalists might not always be able to meet, but nonetheless, at least with this bona fide idea of informing the public, and what is simply a post. They don't really think in terms of sources. You know, I've been a journalist all my life, so my first question is, what is your source for this? They think in terms of platforms. So when we ask them, where did you get this from? They will say, I got it from Instagram, or I got it from Twitch, or I got it from Fortnite. And many of you might not, I hadn't heard about these things until we started going into classrooms. So what we try to do is we are very aware that we can't start imposing this from the top down, because they'll shut down. They don't want to be told, because they know so much more than we adults do. So what we actually do is we tease out of them what they already do know. So we ask them, we show them this information and we ask them, what is this? What do you call it? And especially the young ones don't come with words like disinformation or manipulation or propaganda. They'll come with words like, this is cyberbullying, miss, or this is clickbait, because every young kid now knows you can make an awful lot of money out of sensationalist content, right? And what we do is we really tease out this idea that you can influence opinions online, and that you can make money online. And we use that knowledge from their digital playground, which they have, and where they are running around so freely, and move that onto the world of information, so that they can use the tools, the knowledge, the innate knowledge that they already know, that they can influence somebody online by posting an ugly photo of somebody they've had a fight with, or that they can, you know, grab attention. They can use that then to start sorting information, and that makes them want to do it as well. If you let them use their own words, their own tools, you can go a long way. You also have to keep it light. We've learned that we can't come at them with immediately talking to them about I don't know, refugee policy or religious tolerance, you know. These are adult themes. We need to grab them where they are. We need to find them on WhatsApp. We need to meet them on Twitch and Discord. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, then we can give them the tools, and then they progress incredibly quickly. And in the best case scenario, you will find a child in the end explaining to a teacher in a classroom setting how these things actually work. And that's when you're really getting somewhere, when it's both ways, the learning is coming both ways. Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying, this is something that should really be ingrained in the basis of European educational system, well, of the world educational system. I'll ask this question to Rina in European Research Center. how much of those recommendations that we've heard from Juliane, from Christian, from Dan, from Ahmed are already there when we talk about European educational policy?
Thanks for that question. Most importantly, from the European Commission's point of view, education is really done at the national level. So there is nothing that the European Commission could come and say that has to be there. So we work really on recommendations, and we work on soft decision-making procedures, like a council would make a recommendation about something, or Commission makes a proposal, like now Commission has a proposal on digital education action plan. And part of that is really upskilling both teachers but also students about misinformation. There's a very important action on that. We are all worried about democracy and the effects of the previous years on that. So we're working exactly on misinformation, disinformation. There's an expert group right now who's putting together also guidelines, a little bit more looking also the other work that is being done at UNESCO, great work on that front. And so joining forces there, pulling together, talking in the same ways from all channels towards decision makers in national and regional education about the importance of misinformation and disinformation, and this kind of lie detector idea being more critical. Still, we don't want to create a skeptical world, so that there's definitely balance there to be done. Also, the digital education or the digital competence framework that I was previously talking about, within that one we are really focusing on a little bit the knowledge how algorithms work on the background, creating these echo chambers so that users are more aware, a little bit like what was previously said about this making money on the internet, about the clickbait and so on. So once people are more aware of this kind of mechanisms on the background, they are also more aware how to tweak and how to work around them. So even if the DICCOMP framework is not a book of tricks, but there's a lot of good sort of a basic knowledge behind that can be then turned into this kind of classroom activities that where the knowledge goes both ways. So those are really at the heart of the European Commission actions in terms of digital education action plan. And I also wanted to say it's not only for schools, but this digital upskilling and understanding is really an issue for citizens. We have adults, we have parents. We realized during the COVID pandemic that more than a quarter of European adults living with children in the households with children don't have proper digital skills. They're at the low level of digital skills, no digital skills. So one, of course, they can't help their children in learning, but that is not only a question of skills. It might be that they are also lacking the study skills, the learning to learn skills. Also, they might have a negative disposition to education. So that kind of working on that mindset also at school, but with pupils and their parents is really important. So this life competence, personal, social, emotional, learning to learn competencies. So that's also at the heart. So digital can't be really only about content creation anymore or video conferencing. There is this aspect of self-regulating, knowing how to use this tool for learning purposes, because the information is out there on the internet. It's just a matter of how to get to it. And many of us lack that motivation. And this was actually the topic. We had great talks in the last session. So it's a challenge for us to face, but something workable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this is a good starting point for another question for Juliane. Critical thinking. Critical thinking in our age, when we talk about schools for the future in digital era, of course we want our kids to be well, we take care of their well-being, and we want school to be equal in that. But how does this school that we envision, how does it raise a child who is also thinking critically about the world around himself or herself, as a matter of fact?
I think this goes back to what some of the panelists were saying about, this idea of somebody coming with the truth and handing it down to the next generation is just no longer something that we can rely upon. But critical thinking, sometimes we think it should be called open thinking these days, because what it really is about is in this world of an awful lot of information, we're all trying to shield ourselves from more information coming our way. And it's so easy to then retreat to the opinions that we hold, the opinions that we've always held, the opinions that our friends hold, and just stay there and just only talk to those people who'll confirm those things. The kind of critical thinking that we're thinking about is the critical thinking that embraces the gray areas and that also embraces the areas of disagreement, perhaps, and reopen that gray zone. It's quite difficult, but when you awaken the interest and the curiosity of children in what lies in the unknown, then you can get an awful lot done. I think one really important thing also, critical thinking, that for me as a journalist, it was extraordinary to think about this, but we've really learned that we also have to not just warn children about the bad things that are out there. Be careful, check this, it might be wrong, don't share it, don't give this, We also have to remind them that there are treasures online, that there is a wealth of information and that there is a real value in finding reliable information. And that's something that we have to work at quite hard. One final thing that I would say is that as much as teachers tell us that they struggle with addressing this, and they do, so 3 out of 4 teachers tell us they want to talk about this in the classroom, but they don't know how. Only less than half of them actually raise it in the classroom, and these are the ones that have invited us in to the classrooms and are already engaged, right? What we need to do is we need to make sure that we give them the tools. We have to demystify this. We've got to make it playful. We've got to show them that we can do this in a playful, in an age-relevant, in a non-political way as well. Let's not forget that classrooms are very, very diverse. And once we give them those tools and once we demystify that, once we train them and take away the fear, then they can talk about this, because that's in the end what teaching is about, right? Not knowing something, approaching it, finding out maybe this, maybe that, and then coming to the truth, right? So it's only in a different kind of level, in a digital level, that the teachers at the moment don't always dare approach.
Can I just ask something? Maybe someone has got some, good facts or experience regarding this. How well are teachers actually equipped for dealing with the issues you were saying just now? I'm not sure about Slovenian schools. Maybe Christian could help us out with this question. Media literacy, disinformation, encouragement of critical thinking. We will talk, especially with yourself, about, of course, well-being, but you know the situation in Slovenian schools regarding the Slovenian teachers and their knowledge.
Well, I know that there are quite several ongoing projects doing with this. However, I think this should be actually in syllabus in faculties preparing future teachers for their work. So I think there's a lot to be done here as well, especially as I mentioned before. I mean, the role of the school is changing from giving information to kids to teaching them to choose the information to learn which are actually beneficial, valid, and which are not. So, yeah. So, but I think that the things are changing, and as I said, there are lots of actually projects like Časoris and other projects that are going on in Slovenia.
Well, I would expect that issues like this, what you were saying, Juliana and Christian just now, that already are in faculty curricula, already sort of raising up teachers who are well aware of the situations in the school. Maybe Rina could help us with that. I'm well aware, of course, that the educational policy is being created on the local level, but you do have facts and data, you know, from all over the European Union, if not wider, of course. So, the question I have for you, and I have to ask you for a brief answer, is how well are European teachers already equipped with the skills that Juliane was saying are needed in this modern time of media literacy, when we expect teachers to know everything about media literacy, disinformation, and etc.? Thank you.
Thank you. There are great differences, and those are not only between countries, but they are also within the countries and within the schools. There's a great variety of teachers, and one thing is that we do not have a really good data. At the European level, we collect data with on teachers through TALIS survey mostly, which is by OECD. And exactly this type of questions have not been really at the core of that questionnaire. What we know on a more sort of evidence-based is through our tools that I was mentioning earlier. We have the selfie tool for schools, and we have the selfie for teachers. And within those tools, actually what happens, like when you fill in the survey, we do get that data, and we can aggregate that data. So there we get a lot of teachers whose levels vary. Let's say if we look at the average aggregated data, the teacher's skill set varies a lot. In digital, in general, we are not only looking at skills like teaching critical literacy in terms of disinformation, but there's also parts of creating content, creating digital content, communication, collaboration, looking for information. Teaching these skills at school is really important, but also importantly, the safety, privacy, and data use. And I can only tell you that it varies a lot, and this is a great challenge, but like through many of the actions that I mentioned already earlier, and through the resilience funds also now that the Commission is putting into this, upskilling of teachers is also at the core. Rather than really measuring how they are doing, we are using this tool, this self-reflection idea. We do not test teachers, but we allow them to use these tools to go through their own set of skills, and through that reflect, where am I? What are the gaps in my knowledge? What should I learn next? And like I was mentioning already, school as a learning organization, this is also a chance for teachers within the school or across schools discuss and change good practices. Good practices are often local. They come up as an answer for local problem. We can promote good practices, but good practice in Slovenia might be very different from that good practice in Finland. So there's also that thing to take into account when we're talking about European education, that although we do talk in the same way, there are great contextual changes between the countries.
Thank
so this
you.
is this is the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rina. I think Dan wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, I don't think the biggest problem is actually critical thinking. I think, in my opinion, the biggest problem is autonomous thinking. We don't make autonomous children anymore, neither as parents nor at schools. So, because we live in the combination of risk society that has been established already in the 20th century and surveillance society, which is more recent, so we are being surveilled by different devices, smartphones, and so on. Our children are not autonomous beings anymore. We don't trust them that they are able to go 1 kilometer on foot from our home to school. And we upload to their smartphones, which are anyway tracking devices, additional apps which have some kind of digital electric fence. So if the child breaches that radius, let's say 1 kilometer around your house, you immediately get a push notification that the child is away, and then you can call him or her, hello, Marco, come home immediately, where are you, what are you doing there and there. So what we need are more autonomous children. I mean, otherwise, as I said before, we are making servants of the digital feudalism who will be willing to accept the surveillance technologies, which are anyway at homes. I mean, what have we been doing last year? We don't even trust them that they don't copy when they made some reports for school, and they had to show around, again with the smartphone, if there is somebody around, that they don't copy the tests and show their hands with another camera. So we equipped our homes with surveillance devices and we took away that little part of their autonomy. So this is what worries me most, and this is actually autonomous children, autonomous citizens are the basics of the critical thinkers. And in this time, we actually have, I think, on this planet, more autonomous vehicles than autonomous children. And this is really worrying.
Thank you, Dan. I think that Ahmed could add something to that.
Thank you. I think, yes, we are sometimes underestimating the learners, their potential. And when it comes to building the teacher's capacity, I think that their competencies are much different than the students. For example, students are more advanced in using digital devices, even in younger ages. So why don't we turn this power of their competence into kind of a two-way learning process? While they're learning the values, the purpose from their teachers, they can also contribute to the competence building of their teachers to show them how to use social media, how to use digital devices, because they are really quick, they are really smart, and let's not underestimate the learners and give them a chance to take charge of their learning. Thanks to the previous speaker, they should be more autonomous, and they should also kind of contribute at least to design their learning path, not just leave it to the teacher or to the school or the education system to define them what to learn, but in the context of changing society, they can tell, okay, look, yes, I know I need to learn this, but also please be aware I need to learn that. Maybe you are not fully aware. So it's just giving them a chance to reflect on themselves and then try to contribute to their teachers' competences. Yeah, there's a great potential. Also teach their parents and grandparents about technology. While on the one hand, they learn and they kind of reinforce what they learn. On the other hand, they also pass the knowledge and values they learn at school to home and to their parents.
Thank you, Ahmed. Now, we have about 5 to 10 minutes towards the end of this discussion, and we did not mention enough, I believe, the well-being of our children. And we've heard so many good starting points earlier on before the beginning of the panel, the interesting lecture. I would like to give opportunity to you, Mr. Christian Lešnik-Musek. The well-being of our children, basically where cognitive, social, emotional, bodily, spiritual skills are all taken into account. We've heard about all the dangers of the digital, about autonomous children that are almost impossible in this modern world. So what about well-being and all the competencies? How should we proceed? How should we get there?
I think it's quite natural that in the school that was actually very much based on accountability. The measures of accountability are, of course, the measures of educational outcomes. So we have grades, we have standardized testing, we have PISA and so on. But actually, well-being is not incorporated in these measures. Well-being is it cannot be measured as as such, I mean, it can be measured, but not with standardized tests and grades and so on. So what I really think is what we do here in Slovenia, we a couple of schools, is actually we are trying to put this PERMA theory, PERMA model of Martin Seligman into action. So I think it's quite a useful tool, quite a useful framework for actually making some strategic actions towards building resilience, building gratitude, building optimism and other things that Martin Seligman was talking about. So what I think the most important thing from the takeout from his speech actually was that these things are teachable and they are actually measurable, and we know from hard data that actually well-being is an important factor and have really important outcomes. And another thing is, of course, that if we want to start talking about well-being of students, we have to start talking about well-being of teachers first. So I think these are really important takeouts from his lecture.
Thank you so much, Christian. Since we really have about 5 minutes, Margaret, you've mentioned inclusiveness of the process earlier on, and let's not forget the school we are talking about nowadays is also the school of the migrant children, about children coming from different LGBT communities. I mean, let's not even name all the identities that come into account. How well are all those social groups included into the schooling system that you know?
Well, I think there are many groups, and I think you're right, there are too many to mention. And I think rather than deciding which group is in and which group is out, we need to really look at what are the things how do we make a school inclusive? And for me, it comes down to thinking about pedagogy, about practice, about content, whether it's face-to-face or digital. We need to think how we approach this. There's a few things I think we haven't mentioned yet this afternoon. So, for example, the values and beliefs of our teachers. We have something in Scotland called the Framework for Inclusion, National Framework for Inclusion, and it's based on helping teachers from pre-service right the way through till you're retiring to think about the values and beliefs that they have about learning and teaching and young people, about professional knowledge and understanding and the professional skills and abilities that they need. So I think we need to think about the values and beliefs of teachers as well as of our young people. I think too that we also haven't mentioned much about poverty, and I think we cannot make our societies and our schools inclusive if we don't start to grasp and grapple with some of these really hard issues. And you've mentioned migration. As we look at the world and at the populations moving, they are moving, they're going to continue to move. So I really do think that we need to focus on the things we know from inclusion, from inclusive education, through pedagogy, through curriculum. Those things will help us create an inclusive, a welcoming school where everybody has a right to be, not just a right to be if you fit these criteria.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Okay, the title of this panel was Challenge Accepted. And what I propose us to do, since we don't have time for the concluding remarks, let's do something similar to what Professor Seligman was doing in the beginning. So I had 2 words written here, which he asked us to do. That was happiness and facts and submission. Let's do something similar now. So when we leave this panel and we are talking about transforming the present school into the school for the future, what are 2 things that you would like the decision makers to do when we come to the schooling system? And I'll start with the previous order, so I'll ask Christian in the beginning. 2 words, and then we have to leave the stage.
2 words. Well-being, is it 2 words? Or
1 word.
Well-being and autonomy.
Thank you. Dan?
Okay, it will be 5 or 6 words, but anyway. By 2030, we will have on this planet from 25 to 100 billion smart devices and 8 billion humans. And what I want is more smart humans. I think we're too obsessed with the idea of happiness. I mean, we need smart humans. This idea of happiness reminds me of Thomas Huxley's novel Brave New World, and I think it's a delusion, actually. So, the 2 words, smart teachers, smart parents, smart children. This is what we need for the future.
Okay, I excuse the extra words since they needed context for those 3. Rina, please.
Thank you. My word would be learner agency. I think everything else follows from that, the well-being, the critical thinking, the good other terms, autonomous learners that we mentioned before. So learner agency, having schools supporting that would be really important.
Thank you. Margaret.
I'm stuck between 2 words I used in my talk, which was humanity and compassion.
Since you are in Glasgow, you can have 4.
Oh. Well, I had humanity and compassion in my talk, and I still think we need to keep those at the heart and center of what we do, but also inclusion for all, which is 3, and with that I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Ahmed, please, at the Council of Europe.
I would say the human qualities that many other speakers mentioned, there are really some other things we should concentrate rather than this, cognitive and other skills. But the qualities we need, what mattered the most during the pandemic, like solidarity, like empathy, like compassion, like thinking of others, responsible shopping, etc. Many other things we should introduce or focus on.
Thank you. Thank you, Ahmed, and kind regards to Strasbourg. Juliane, please, your 2 words.
That's so difficult. 2 words. I would say incentivize the teachers. Listen to what they need. Like you were saying, you can't just heap more work onto teachers. We've got to incentivize them and make them really want to do it by building this into things like the PISA rankings of the OECD, and there are steps underway right now, so good things are happening. I love what Murat was saying about solidarity as well. While we're waiting to train the teachers, count on the civil reserve that is out there. The European Union has recently said journalists should go more into classrooms to do this in the interim while we're fixing this problem. And there are people out there, all we need to do is make connections and break silos.
Thank you so much to all the panelists here on stage and to everyone who joined us remotely. This was the panel, School and Society in a Digital World. Thank you for listening.